What up, Reader fam? Today I'm bringing you another one of my books I've read recently videos where I talk about some of the books that I've read recently that I don't have that much to say about, but I have interesting things to say about. I'm really excited about the books that I'm going to be talking about today. I have some books that I really loved, and I have some books that I just felt kind of okay about. So without further ado, let's get started. The first book I have here is the Booksplosion Book of the Month for the month of February, and we worked with Bloomsbury, and that book is Waapah, Reign the Earth by A.C. Gaughen. We've already had our live show, so if you wanted to hear a spoilery discussion on this book, then I will leave a link down below to that recorded live show. This story is about this girl named Shalia who agrees to an arranged marriage with a nearby king in order to ensure peace for her people. While things start out okay, they get increasingly worse. Shalia finds out that her husband Calyx is experimenting on and killing off people with Elemente abilities. These are people who have powers involving earth, air, fire, and water. I found myself so easily immersed in this story, which is not something that I can say with a lot of fantasy books. I'm someone who has to work extra hard up here in the imagination station to fully visualize everything. But the way that the world was built up in this book, I was able to picture everything super clearly, which was a relief on my part because I didn't have to do as much work up here. Which leads me to say, if you are new to fantasy or you're looking to get into fantasy, I would recommend checking out this book. But I also think that if you're a fantasy lover, that you'd still enjoy this book. The world isn't too complicated, but it's still a really interesting world, and it's full of rich history. This is one of those books where you finish the book and you immediately need book 2 in your hands because you gotta figure out what happens next. You need to know right now. And this is not a lighthearted, happy-go-lucky book by any means. In fact, we go over some pretty tough topics throughout this book. This book does contain an abusive relationship along with rape, so definitely be aware of those things before picking this book up. While there are very dark things discussed throughout this book, none of these things are glorified or romanticized. The plot itself had many things going for it. In fact, there were several times when I was just taken aback by the things that were happening, because there are so many unexpected moments throughout this story. I caught myself several times with wide eyes and my jaw to the floor. In this book, there are characters that you will love and there are characters that you will hate. The villain of this story, oh man, the villain of the story. He has no redeemable qualities. None, zip, nada. He is brutal, and it's not just in the way that he's described. We have receipts. Throughout the story, we continue ringing up all these terrible things that he has done in his past and he's doing currently. And we continue getting those receipts. Our main character, I will admit, when I was first introduced to her, I was a little bit annoyed with her. She's not really used to this new fancy lifestyle that she's introduced to. And so because of this, she kind of always has this element of surprise with everything she's introduced to. So it took a while getting used to her getting used to this new kingdom. It's really cool though, because in the beginning of the story, she kind of gives off this vibe that she's weak. But throughout the story, she proves herself to be incredibly strong and powerful through her actions. It's definitely not a situation where we're just told that the main character is strong. We see it through every obstacle that she endures. She would do anything for her people and for her family, even if that means risking her life. Also, I really wanted to mention the fact that these characters do not feel like teenagers. I was picturing all the characters in this book to be in like the 20s to mid-20s. So if you're looking for a YA book where the characters feel older, definitely check out this book. All in all, I gave this book a whopping 4.5 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read the first book in the Vengekeep Prophecies by Farrey. This story follows our main character named Jackster, who is a part of a family of thieves, and every year in the town that he lives in, a prophecy is revealed through a tapestry that's been made hundreds of years ago by these prophetic twins. The town of Vengekeep is in a state of horror when the tapestry is revealed, and they find that they'll be hit with plague after plague, and the family that will save them from all these plagues is Jackster's family, whom nobody in the town seems to trust. Jackster's family is keeping a big secret though. That being that a while back they had actually switched out the tapestries and replaced them with these fake ones. They just didn't know that their fake prophecies would end up becoming true. Shook! I had an interesting reading experience with this book because I originally picked it up in May and I read a decent chunk of it, then I put it down because I got distracted by other books, then I picked it back up in September, then I set it down again, and then I finally finished it in the month of February. I don't know why I'm like this, but I am. I genuinely thought this was a fantastic start to this middle grade fantasy series. I like that it took a fun twist on the prophecy trope, and it takes it in a rather comedic direction, even though the outcome of the prophecy isn't that comedic. Like, some crazy bad stuff is happening because of it. I will say though that it does make for an exciting and surprising plot. Our main character Jax has to go on a bit of an adventure to get his family out of this mess, and I really liked following his adventure. He's a really great character. He's fun to follow because he himself is really terrible at thieving, and he's constantly finding himself in trouble because he's a bit of a klutz, but at the same time, he's also a super intelligent character. The story is interesting too because it kind of explores how even though you feel like your path has been set for you, it doesn't mean you can't find yourself and explore your own options. This story wraps up pretty nicely, but it also leaves you wanting more, so I'm definitely excited to carry on with this trilogy. All in all, I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Meetcute, which features a bunch of different stories by a bunch of different YA authors. I'm really bad at reviewing anthologies, so I don't have much to say here. Each story was written with the meet-cute element, that being where two characters meet and have a spark of connection. I ended up giving this book a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I feel like most of the stories I read were like 3 stars. There were a few standouts though, like I loved Emery Lord's story. I also love the story by Jocelyn Davies. Her story reminded me a lot of The Sun Is Also a Star by Nicola Yoon. It was really interesting because reading these stories felt like you were just getting the start of a story. You never really felt like you got closures with the stories. They all felt very open-ended and that they could be fleshed out into full-on novels, which was a very weird feeling while reading it. I would flip a page and it would take me to the next story and I'd be like, but wait, where's the rest of the story I was just reading? The reason I love anthologies though is because it exposes you to new authors. It's kind of like one of those tasting plates you can get at restaurants where you can sample different foods that the restaurant is serving. This is like a sample plate but for authors, except you don't eat the authors, you eat their words. And you see what kind of stories they're serving. Next up, I read The Wild Robot by Peter Brown. This story is about a robot who wakes up one day on an island and she must create a life for herself on this island. She interacts with the animals on this island and at first they're not very trusting of her, but she begins to build their trust by helping them with different tasks. When she finds herself finally getting to a stable place on this island, she's met with something that could threaten her stay. This story explores so many great ideas. We explore friendship and all that it takes to build a connection with someone. We also explore the idea of family and how you don't have to be blood related to be family. While I liked this for the most part, I wasn't the biggest fan coming out of it. The more that I let it sit, the more that I realized it was just an okay read. My biggest complaint is not a lot happens in this story. We do have all these little things that happen here and there, but I kind of wish that there would have been hints early on of the bigger thing that happens later on in the story. It could have been done in a very mysterious way to grab the reader's attention and to build a bit of curiosity, but overall I felt the story kind of felt a bit disjointed. And also, while I did love the illustrations in this story, sometimes the artwork would spoil what would happen and I'd be like, excuse you? Can you let me read what happens first and then you can show me through the illustration? But the artwork in the story is excellent and it melted my little art-loving heart. All in all, I gave this book a 3 out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Waapah Standoff by Andrew Smith, and this is the sequel to Winger by Andrew Smith. This story follows the aftermath of book 1, which I can't tell you what happens in book 1 because obviously spoilers, but we follow our main character Ryan Dean and how he is dealing with the aftermath of that event, but we also see how he is dealing with his annoying roommate and the pressure from his coach to lead his rugby team to victory. I have really mixed feelings on this book. While I did love Winger, I've also changed my perspective on that book a little bit. After reading and hearing different reviews on that book, I still really loved that book, but I definitely see some issues that have been brought forth. I will say that I loved the humor in this book. It was on point. Andrew Smith is pretty dang hilarious. His humor is a little bit over the top, but that's why I love it. And I love seeing growth in our main character Ryan Dean throughout this story, because oh my Lanta, he was aggravating throughout this book, let me just say. And it was nice to see him go from a super frustrating character to a much better character by the end of it. But the place where this book strongly lacks is in its female characters and in the plot. The one real female character that we get in this book is Ryan Dean's girlfriend. There are other female characters, but they're just kind of in the background. But Ryan Dean's girlfriend is the most flat and uninteresting character, and she deserved so much better. It feels like she was really just in this book to serve as Ryan Dean's girlfriend, which is not okay. Give her a personality, give her some character depth. I think she could have been a really interesting character. And as a whole, I just really wanted more from the plot. All in all, I ended up giving this book a 2.5 out of 5 stars. And lastly, I read this little picture book because you can never be too old for a picture book. This is Littlebot and Sparrow by Jake Parker, and the reason that I actually wanted to read this book is because I love the author and illustrator of this book. Jake Parker actually has a YouTube YouTube channel where he talks in depth about his creative process, and I've been able to take his insight and apply it to my own creative process when it comes to writing. And I just randomly decided one day that I would make it my goal to read all of his books, which is going to be quite the challenge because some of his stuff is out of print, but I am determined. But anyways, I don't have much to say about this. It was a sweet story about an unlikely friendship between a robot and a sparrow. It's a simple story, but it's also really charming. And of course, we've got these incredible illustrations throughout the book that I was just completely obsessed with. Jake Parker is an incredible artist. I ended up giving this a 5 out of 5 stars. I'm also gonna leave a link down below in the description to Jake's YouTube channel because it's definitely worth checking out. So these were 6 of my most recent reads. I want to hear from you guys down below in the comments. Have you guys read any of these books and what were your thoughts on them? Also, just let me know down below a book that you read recently that you loved or a book recently that you didn't like. Let me know down below in the comments all your thoughts. If you like this video, be sure to give it a big thumbs up. I post videos frequently on this channel, so if you want to see more bookish content from me, be sure to go and hit subscribe or go and click the little bell icon and you'll be notified every time I post new videos. As always, thanks for watching guys, and I will see you soon with a new video. Bye, chew.